Yeah, and welcome to the first webinar in our Getting to Psychology Grad School series. We are so happy that there are so many of you today. We have 41 participants now, so welcome. We have a good geographical diversity as well. The majority of the folks are from Richmond, Virginia, just like the four of us. We are currently located here, and we are all at VCU. But we have people from other cities and other states, so that's great. I will share my screen with the presentation for today, and I will introduce everybody first, and then we will start with Dr. T's presentation about the different PhD programs that we have at VCU. So let me share my screen. Okay, can you guys see this all right? Okay, excellent. And I wonder how I can set a slideshow. Yeah, there it is. So today we are joined by Dr. Tiyacca Simms-Jones, who is the Associate Director of Psychology Advising and Graduate Academic Operations here at VCU Psychology Department. Then we have three graduate students, me, Polina Beloborodova, Camila Tirado, and Melissa Avila here. And this event was sponsored by the Committee for the Promotion of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion of our department at Virginia Commonwealth University. So with that, we will start with Dr. T's talk. So I will stop sharing here, and Dr. T, if you have slides, then feel free to share them. If not, then we will be happy to just listen to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Polina said, am I okay? It looks like I'm glitching on my end. Okay, awesome. So as Polina said, I'm the Associate Director for Graduate Advising and Graduate Academic Operations, and that means I oversee the doctoral programs in the Department of Psychology on the administrative side. So I'm the person that makes sure everything is covered and that you're good and that you've met all the requirements as outlined for your degree, including, depending on what track you're on, that you've done the correct internship hours, that your thesis and dissertation and all those wonderful check marks have been made before you can go on to graduate and obtain your PhD. So in our department at VCU, we have a couple of different tracks, right? So we have health, developmental, social, counseling, and clinical. Clinical has two separate tracks within that actual program. So across all spectrums, we completely support scholarship and research. So each track affords all students the opportunity to do research, to write grants, to be on grant writing teams, as well as to pursue their personal interest within that specific scope of psychology. We have great opportunities for internship with several academic and community partners, including we have our own CPSD on campus, which serves the community by providing low-cost mental health services, which our students can rotate through that. So like I said, we have health, and those who are interested in health psychology can go into various different kind of sort of interest. Right now, we have one of our students that's graduating, Danielle Smith, who actually did her dissertation on the attitudes that African Americans have towards getting healthy or health education. She is actually going to go study at George. She is actually going to do her postdoc work at George Mason, I believe. We also have those who are interested in social. I don't believe I have anybody graduating from social this year just yet. So those are often interested in how mental health in society, how societal interventions can affect mental health. And what you can do within those societal structures to affect mental health. So we have some really great researchers in that area. Dave Chester is actually one of Dave Chester and Dr. Jeff Green. Dr. Jeff Green is actually the program director for the social development, the social psychology concentration. And one thing I love about the VCU Department of Psychology is that for us to be a small department, we rock when it comes to research and grants. We are one of the smallest departments in VCU, but we by far are one of the heavy hitters when it comes to research and grants. We have grants that are from the federal level all the way up to HRSA, Department of Defense, all the way down to working with our local community. We have Dr. Terry Sullivan, who is an absolutely fabulous person and is the graduate program director. So I work with her very closely. Her and Dr. Fantasy Lozada have a $5.5 million grant to work with the local school systems and how violence and being affected or exposed to a violence helps or hinders Black or Brown students' mental health. So one thing that I will honestly say about our programs, if you have an interest in it, 99% of the time, we have a faculty member that also has the interest and that is also working within that realm and has substantial grant backing to go with it. So that's our social developmental is led by the wonderful Marsha Winters, who is specifically interested in grooming students to look at the effects of mental health and how developmental processes speak to mental health. And so she leads our developmental concentration, and she is absolutely fabulous at it. So next is our clinical program, and right now that is being led by Bryce McLeod and Jared Keeley. However, they have some wonderful support in Dr. Rose, and I always call her Dr. Rose Carey, and Dr. Heather Jones, who are complete advocates for helping those who may come from a marginalized or untraditional background get the kind of research support and research opportunities that they would like. So at the start of this, I said clinical has two concentrations, behavioral health and adult child. Those are varying spectrums. One great thing about our clinical program is that as a part of your learning, you're actually going to be doing internships. And so if you are interested in affecting a specific community and you're interested in clinical counseling, our clinical faculty work very hard to get you into a space where you're going to be affecting change in the community that you have the most interest in. Fun fact, 100% of our clinical students match with the APA accredited internship at the conclusion of their time with us. And right now, like I said, that is being led by Bryce McLeod, as well as Dr. Jared Keeley. Again, heavy hitters when it comes to research. Our clinical faculty are known for the research that they do. They have everything from HRSA grants down to community grants. So our last program is led by Dr. Susan Mazio, and that is our counseling program. Again, another APA accredited program like our clinical program. Spending time or graduating from that program also will give you the opportunity to do clinical rotations. Most of those students do clinical rotations through our CPSD, which is our community-based mental health clinic that serves the Richmond community. So if you're interested in counseling, you will do rotations through there. Again, another fun fact, 100% of those who graduate from our counseling programs also get an APA certified internship. Again, also with the heavy hitting in research, we also have some fabulous researchers out of the counseling department, including Sean Jones, Dr. Eswaldo Moreno, Dr. Susan Mazio, who again really encourage their students to and groom them and support them in figuring out the kind of communities that they would like to affect change in and getting them in those spaces. Dr. Sean Jones is actually working on a huge grant right now that is looking at the effects of mental health on marginalized African-American, Hispanic men, and how we can affect change there. So one of the great things about our program is and I'm sure Camila, Melissa, and Paula, will tell you more about from a student perspective, but we do not take the GRE. Research has shown us that GRE and standardized testing is not really a good marker of is not really a good marker of how intelligent someone is or their ability to do the work here. We holistically look at you as an applicant. So we want to look at you, not measured against anyone else, but what you have to offer to the Department of Psychology, where you would like to affect change, how we can help you get there, if it's a good fit. If we have the level of research that you're interested in, if we have faculty that match up. So when you come to us, you are automatically linked with an advisor who is with you the entirety of your time with us, who will groom you and help you pick the right classes, to help you pick the correct research opportunities that will give you the support needed. If you're interested in academia, on the academic side of how do you run a psychology department, how do you foster and provide opportunities for other students to realize their dream in psychology, there's a rotation that you can do with me and myself, Dr. Lou, on the other side, where we teach you about the administration of psychology and what that looks like, and how you can provide opportunities for others to become psychologists. A little general info to close this up, just some hard numbers for you. We do provide funding for our students. There's a couple of different pockets, but the one that I generally deal with is our GTA, meaning that I will fund you for 4 years, meaning you get about a $22,000 stipend per year, and I will pay for up to 15 credits per semester, fall and spring. There are other opportunities for other funding, but if you're a GTA, what that means is that you will come with us, you'll be given a faculty mentor, and then you will GTA, grad teaching assistant. You will be a teaching assistant to help faculty facilitate some of our undergraduate courses. So you'll also get the ability to develop some skills around teaching, faculty affairs. What does that look like for you in the grand scheme of your career aspirations and goals? So you do have that opportunity. You may also have a GRA, which is a graduate research assistant. Again, because we are heavy hitters when it comes to research and the grants that we're able to get. If you're able to get on a grant that is funded by a faculty member, you and that faculty member would work out what your funding looks like, what your courses would look like, to make sure that you're able to fulfill what needs to be done on the graduate research assistant side. Also, to toot our own horn again, we have some institutional awards, the SRB Fellowship Award, which again fully funds a student, gives them a stipend for up to 4 years. It is a really big national award, and for the last 3 years, psychology has proudly claimed 2 of those 3 awards. So that is a really big deal. The SRB Fellowship also gives those recipients some other support, some other research opportunities. That's really it for the general spiel of how our programs go. If there are any questions, please feel free, Polina, to share my email address and contact information, guys. You can always self-schedule with me. And I'm a big advocate of sometimes students don't want to ask the really nitty-gritty questions because an administrator is there. So I am going to say my piece. Thank you guys for joining us today. I really hope to see some of you apply to our programs. Polina is going to give you my contact information. Please feel free to email me or schedule some time to speak with me. I'm happy to answer any specific application questions that you may have, but I'm going to bid you adieu so you guys can ask these lovely ladies, who are all quite fabulous, any questions that you may have, okay?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Simms-Jones, for giving this great introduction of our department. And yeah, we are proud students of VCU Psychology, and our department is pretty small, but a high achieving department for sure. And I left the contact information of Dr. Simms-Jones, the link to her VCU page in the chat. So you can bookmark this page and book a consultation with her if you would like to know more details about our programs. With that, we will move to the part of the presentation about how to get to such an amazing department as ours. but we will also keep it broad. So we don't want to focus just on VCU in this presentation, because you're interested in many different departments and you should apply a lot, not just to our programs, but to many programs. So we are aspiring to cover the broad range of application questions in this presentation. But before we move there, I have a poll for you to participate. So I just launched the poll for the graduate student, that's called Graduate Student Interest Poll. And if you go to polls on Zoom, you can vote for which program you're interested in from the ones that VCU offers, or perhaps there is a different program you're interested in. In addition to the programs that we have at VCU, there can be neuroscience programs and quantitative psychology programs, or more applied like educational psychology programs and so on. So we don't offer them at VCU, although, well, we are connected to those study fields. Those are the programs we have on the list there. So yeah, please vote there. And also one more question is, are you applying in this year's cycle? So in November, December of this year. And your replies to this question will help us to perhaps adjust our talks a little bit to make it more relevant for you. And I can see so far that there is a great diversity of the programs that folks are interested in. So each program got at least one vote. So far, counseling is the leader in the poll. And then the majority of the participants are not applying this year's cycle or did not decide yet, but there are quite a few participants who are planning to apply in this year's cycle. So yeah, we will try to make our presentation relevant for all of you. Yeah, with that, I will end this poll and share the results with you. Yeah, and then I will share my screen so that we can get back to the presentation. Yeah, let me open the presentation tab and sharing my screen now. So I will go to slideshow. Yeah, and Melissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So yes, I'm definitely a little bit more informal when it comes to these types of conversations. So if Camila or Polina, if you want to jump in at any slide, feel free. I don't want to overtake it. And I know we all have different insights into this process because we all did a slightly different process. I applied back kind of in the day, back in 2016. So I'm sure the process has changed quite a bit. When I applied to VCU, the GRE was still required. And it was still required at most programs throughout the US. So I did take the GRE, which I know is not kind of a staple in the process anymore for many students. Good for y'all, and since financially and effort-wise. But this is like a good kind of outline of how to start planning for that process. I definitely, just a little bit about myself. I completed my undergraduate experience at UCLA back in the West Coast. And I didn't actually know about research and it being a big requirement for grad school until about halfway through my undergraduate experience. And that's when I realized I did not have enough what people would consider research experience in order to apply right after the 4 years. So for me, I decided to stay a 5th year as an undergrad in order to complete an honors thesis and get 1 more year as a undergraduate research assistant. People sometimes decide to do this after undergrad. You can get like a research lab manager position after. They're a little competitive, at least at UCLA at the time. And I knew it would be easier for me to stay as an undergrad and get that research experience rather than being a post-bac. So I stayed that 5th year, completed that honors thesis, participated in the McNair program, which is a kind of like a national recognized graduate research program, undergraduate prep research program. I also did a lot of research through the formal psychology department there. Although I decided after those 5 years, I was too tired and burnt out and did not want to commit to another 6 years of grad school, which is what a clinical counseling PhD program is. It's different from the PsyD, but we're here in the PhD side. And I took 2 years off and decided to do a Fulbright fellowship and teach English in Costa Rica for a year, but made sure that during that year, I was still doing psychology related work, because you will have to explain that gap between undergrad and grad school if you do take time off. And I wanted to make sure I had that story. And then I applied to grad school. So there's a lot of, I say that because there's lots of trajectories to grad school. I think we have professors sometimes have a very, what they know, how to get to grad school, what's the traditional route, and it doesn't have to be like that if things have changed and whatnot. So you can always get there even if it's different. But this is, I think, a good list to do maybe about 6 months before you're looking at applying. If you wanted to be very safe, I think it's good to start this kind of process a year in advance, especially in terms of preparing for having that research experience. You definitely want to have at least 1 to 2 years of research experience under your belt. And I think that's the one thing that people, I think, don't emphasize enough to undergraduates earlier on, in order to have enough years of undergraduate research experience. But we'll kind of tackle these little sections as we go along in the presentation. So searching for potential advisors. This, I think, is something I did. Polina in the next slide has a great example of how to reach out to a potential advisor. I was in Costa Rica at the time when I was applying, so I think it's a little different to manage the timelines when you're outside the US, but still doable. And I think it got a little ahead of me, so I think I reached out maybe about 4 months in advance, but 6 months I think is a good kind of time to start thinking about it. A good resource I recommend is this book called Insider's Guide to Graduate Programs in Clinical and Counseling Psychology. You can find it on Amazon for like $20. I thought it's a good resource. I think you could also check it out at the library to kind of just get an idea of what programs in clinical and counseling exist out there. Doesn't have all of the programs, and it's typically just US focused. But I found useful this little chart they have that's like a Likert scale, and it has like 10 research on this side and like 10 clinical on this side. And it kind of gives each program a rating of how research focused it is and how clinical focused it is. Because even though clinical and counseling PhDs are both, there is kind of like an unknown feeling to the program and kind of demands that you will know whether your program is very heavy research focused or more clinical focused or a little more in the middle. PhDs tend to be very research heavy, PsyDs tend to be very clinical heavy. What I liked about VCU is that I found its rating was in the middle. So it valued, it was open to clinical as much as it was open to research. And that's kind of what I enjoyed, because at the time of application, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do research full time, like academic, be a tenured faculty. I didn't know if I wanted to do that. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to do clinical work. So I wanted a program that was more middle. And UCLA, all the UCs tend to be super research focused, kind of prepping you for academia and very little talk of anything else outside of that. And I found VCU, while it does value research, it was not the end all be all. And I liked that book was able to find those programs. So I kind of scanned that, and those programs actually have a list. That book has a list of different faculty that are at these programs. And I use that as kind of like an initial guide to look into programs and kind of start looking and reaching out to them. But like Polina said, it's great to kind of look at the programs you're interested in. Most of the programs will have a website, and it'll say which professors are taking students in this upcoming cycle. Sometimes they don't have that page and it makes it harder, or they don't update it. And that means you do have to be a little more proactive at reaching out to them earlier in the process, so that you know whether or not that's going to be a list on your application, because there was a lot of programs that I really liked, but the professors that I wanted to work with were not taking students that cycle. And there was not any really other faculty that I really enjoyed. So they ended up having to get knocked off my list because the faculty that I wanted to work with was not taking students at the time. And we can move on and look at kind of Paulina's example. I think it's a great example.
Yeah, I will chip in with that, and I will share my experience about how I searched for potential advisors. When I was applying, I was in Russia, and I knew very little about the academia in the US and all the needs and grades of applying for a PhD. And that's one of the reasons why we are having those series to share this knowledge for those who are who don't know about it. So what I did was to read publications on the topics that were interesting for me and where I already had some research experience. And I just looked at who wrote those publications, and then I Googled them. I found their pages on their university websites, their contacts, and I just reached out to them. A couple of them, I think, knew my advisor from Russia, but the majority of them were cold emails. And I'm going to show you one of those cold emails that I sent to my current advisor at VCU, Kirk Brown. So in this email, I introduced myself in the first paragraph, and I told him where I am. So at that time, I was at Moscow's Higher School of Economics in the International Lab of Positive Psychology or Personality and Motivation. And I know this is a really, really long name for a lab, but this is how we were called. And I told him about my research experience, that I was working at this organization in the US, but online, and how right away I told him that I was interested in mindfulness. This is what he studies. And right away, I told him that I have some research experience in this field to get him interested in reading on my letter. So, and I told him that I'm interested in his research. And then in the next paragraph, I tell him about why I'm writing this email and that I'm applying for graduate programs this fall, and that VCU is among my top priorities. So I told every single advisor that their program was my top priority. So yeah, it's a little bit of a white lie because all my programs were my top programs, but I think this makes them feel good that their program is a top program for you as a candidate. So, and then I asked him what I want from him. So I asked if he could let me know if he was accepting a graduate student that fall. And if yes, then if he would be interested in my candidacy. And then I told him that my CV is attached, and I think I attached my writing sample as well. Then I told him about the research that I would like to do and how this research is connected to what he does at VCU. So this is about my experience and my experience in mindfulness research in particular. So by that time, I did a systematic review on the literature on a particular aspect of mindfulness. So I told him about that. And then in the next paragraph, I said that what I would like to do, that I would like to continue this line of research. And then I gave him a little bit more information about my experience and my statistical skills, my research skills, so everything that would make him interested in my candidacy, in addition to my research experience that's in his field. And then, of course, there is a thank you message and a signature. And then he was one of the few advisors who actually replied to this email without any reminders. We will go over kind reminders later in this presentation. But yeah, he was one of the few advisors who replied with not just a one-line email like, yeah, I'm considering candidates, feel free to apply. He wrote that, so from his email, I could see that he actually read my email, and he said that my candidacy will be strong for the VCU program, and that he was looking forward to seeing my application. So this was encouraging, and the only programs where I got an interview were the ones where the advisors replied with an email that showed that they actually read my email and that they were interested in me. All the other advisors who replied something like, yeah, I'm taking a student, apply. Those didn't invite me for an interview. So this could be an indication for you once you write those emails about who's interested and where you have a chance to get an interview. So with that, we go to the kind reminders. And as I said before, some of the professors whom I sent those letters didn't reply at all. Some of them replied right after my first email, like my current advisor, and some of them replied after kind reminders. So what I see when I talk to undergraduate students at VCU and outside of VCU is that people are like scared of writing those kind reminders because they think if they didn't reply to the first email, they will never reply. They are not interested, but this is not like that. So advisors are super busy and they may not answer your emails right away. Sometimes they will not ever answer your emails. So it's okay to send them a polite reminder, and then you can send them one more polite reminder. And if they don't reply to your email after the second reminder, just let them be. Maybe they are not taking a student and they don't have time to reply. Maybe they are not interested. So 2 reminders are enough. And then you will send a lot of those emails. So it's helpful to track your communication with potential advisors when you email them, when you sent a reminder, when you sent your second reminder, and what they replied. So I will show you an example of tracking those communications in one of the next slides. But first, the example of those kind reminders. So this is an email that I wrote to Barbara Fredrickson at UNC Chapel Hill. So this is the first email. I met her at a conference in Europe, so I referred to this in this very first sentence there, so that she maybe she will remember that we spoke at that conference. And then I also told her that I'm interested in the program at UNC, and she didn't reply. So this is the reminder that I sent her. I'm not sure you received my email. Here's what I emailed before. So this implies that it's not their fault that they didn't reply, although most of the time it is. They just didn't reply. But you like hint that probably they didn't receive the email. So there was some glitch in the email. So it's not their fault. And this is just a reminder. So I think half of the professors who replied to my emails at all replied after the kind reminder. So kind reminders are very powerful because they will make them feel guilty that they didn't reply, and this will increase the probability that they actually reply. But sometimes they don't reply even after the second kind reminder. And it's okay. Some of them are not taking students, some of them are not interested, some of them are too busy. Yeah, just drop those who don't reply.
I do want to add.
Example. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Just real quick. It's also important to look at their lab websites or the application websites of the universities, because sometimes professors will list like, do not email me, just because they're so busy, they have too much going on, and then they're kind of getting bombarded by emails. So sometimes it's okay to look at there first just to see if you should send an email, but sending an email is always the best way to get your foot in the door. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, that's true. In psychology programs, it's customary to send those emails to your potential advisors. In other programs, like in economics, like you'd never ever email your potential advisor. That's a very bad sign for them. But we are not in economics, we are in psychology. And in psychology, we email our potential advisors. And this is a snippet of the tracking sheet that I used to track communications and with my potential advisors. And also it contained the information about the programs and their funding and deadlines and all of this. So yeah, it was a very detailed sheet, but here you can see this snippet of my communications with advisors. So for example, at VCU, where I am now, I emailed Kirk Brown, my current advisor. So I emailed him on the 19th of October. He replied and agreed, means that like he's interested. Then there were some professors whom I emailed and then they didn't reply. Even after the second kind reminder. Some of them told me that they retired, that they were not taking students. Some of them replied that, yeah, apply, just a one-line email. So yeah, look for those emails that are longer and that show that they are interested in your experience. Yeah, and with that, we go to the GRE. So Melissa, if you could cover this.
Yeah, so if you are interested, or I know VCU doesn't accept the GRE, it doesn't need to. You can still submit scores if you would like. Most programs are like that. They don't require it anymore, but you can still submit scores if you want to. And there still is programs that require the GRE. I think a good amount of the UCs still do. If you're interested in looking at the West Coast, I think some of the programs still do. But they're more moving towards the optional realm. I do think the GRE can be a good supplement if you have poor GPA scores as an undergrad, and you're not doing a master's. I've heard that's a good way if you're a good test taker. It's never a bad thing. And if you bomb it, you don't have to report it if your school doesn't require it. If it requires it, then, well, you're kind of stuck. But I've heard that it's a good kind of booster in terms of numbers, that realm. I'll be frank and upfront. I did not have the greatest GPA. My psych GPA was a 3.0. My overall GPA was a 3.45. I was a pre-med at the start of my undergraduate experience and crashed my GPA. And that was really hard to recover from. And speaking about that, my application helped so that they can contextualize why my GPA was on the lower end. But also the GRE was a good way of showing that, of having more positive numbers. I took a formal class. I think I took a class through Kaplan. It is a little pricey. I got a scholarship and just decided to use it on that and found that pretty helpful. But these are all kind of good suggestions for kind of study prep that are more affordable. There's a lot of free resources nowadays as well, if you don't want to take the paid route. But it could be a good way to boost those numbers if you kind of buckle down and study. I took it twice. The first time I got a lower quant, higher writing, and then I took it and it switched the next time. So either way, most of the time, most programs will require you to only report the highest score in each area. So your highest score of quant, vocab, and then the written portion. So even if you've taken it 2 or 3 times, you can just report the highest one. At least that was my experience back in the day when I was recording these scores. But like I said, most schools are kind of steering clear from this. So not most students aren't putting a lot of focus of this on their applications unless you feel you can kind of buckle down, do really well, and kind of improve those low numbers if that's your case as well. I'm not sure if Camila had a different experience since she just recently applied, or suggestions about that.
Yeah, so I personally knew I didn't want to take the GRE. So my experience is very much different. I did start studying. I loved Magoosh. Magoosh was great. Those flashcards are great. But I realized that I didn't want to do it. I was pretty fortunate that during the time when I was applying to programs across, the country, that they weren't really taking them, or they were accepting them, but they wouldn't really weigh it into the decision. I myself was leaning on my academic career. I was involved in research starting my freshman year. I was an untraditional student. So I came in knowing that I'm going back to school. I know I need to start doing research as soon as possible. So I had a different experience with that. So I was really relying on my research experience, my grades, my GPA. I did have a 4.0, which did help me receive scholarships and more merit that did help my CV kind of expand. But yeah, I knew I didn't want to do it. So I was like, if I don't want to do it, I'm not going to do it. And I was just conscious of that. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think if you look at the programs that are taking it and you know that it's something that you need to kind of boost. I saw a chat question right now. If you know it's something that can really boost literally what Melly's sharing about the fact that her GPA was a little bit lower because of those experiences. If you're kind of on the same boat, it might be beneficial to do the GRE. Like if you don't have as much as research experience, maybe it is beneficial as well, but it all depends. And I think we're going to talk a lot more about that, those specifics later as well. But yeah, that's all I got.
I'll definitely chime in on that question. There definitely is not like a cutoff or like an area, because it is so kind of, everybody is kind of like, well, you can take it or you cannot take it these days, that there isn't really like a recommended, like if you have this, do this. I would just suggest if you can speak to your undergraduate advisors and kind of get a feel. I definitely will say that especially the biggest thing that gets you in is program and faculty fit. So even though, because even my GRE scores were not the best, they were not incredible. They also were above average. So they weren't average, they were above average, but they were not the best. So that definitely, I don't think super boosted my low GPA. I think what helped more was that I was able to talk about why my GPA was on the lower end. And I was conscious going into the process that my GPA was going to be the point of contention in application. So I made sure to speak to that and highlighted other areas of my CV. So I made sure I also had no publications. So do not get scared if you don't have any publications. It's still possible. It's just you need to kind of show that. I always say you're hustling through, and I was a definite hustler. I had like over 20 external scholarships. I did an honors thesis. I was 2 majors, 2 minors as an undergrad. I did the Fulbright Fellowship, which is a nationally renowned fellowship. So making sure that you're aware of your deficits and kind of making up for them in a way, and having great essays and letters, which we'll get to it too, also really helps.
So if you do decide to take the GRE, I can share my experience. I changed my career from the corporate career to academic career. And last time I solved the problems that are there on the GRE, the math GRE, was like 15 years before I was taking the GRE. So I forgot like all this high school math thoroughly when I started preparing for the GRE. And it took me about a year to properly prepare for it. And my score was also like not stellar on math, but it was way above average. And my score on verbal turned out to be great, thanks to Magoosh flashcards. So spend about 80% of your time on math problems, because the programs look first at your math score and only then to your verbal and essay score. Practice tests on the ETS website. It's advisable to practice before you start your preparation to see your current level, and then take the second test. So they have 2 tests available for free there. So you take the first test before you prepare, and you take your second test after you prepare to see how much progress you made and what are the areas where you're still lacking the necessary skills. And then you can also use the Magoosh problem bank, because at some point you just run out of problems to solve if you prepare intensely. So the best books, 5-pound book of the GRE practice problems was the absolute best for me. I solved like every single problem in that book. And my preparation was pretty intense. I was just flipping through the flashcards every day while I was commuting to work, and I was working on the math problems almost every day as well. So I solved the whole 5 pounds book of the GRE practice problems, and then I solved some of the parts of the Manhattan GRE books. And I used them to practice more on the problems that I had trouble with. Then GRE has a very cumbersome screen calculator, and it's while you're practicing, use an imitation of this calculator. There are several of them online, so you can easily find one. Don't use your phone calculator, or don't use the like the physical calculator. Practice with the GRE screen calculator so that you get used to this, because if you do get used to the screen calculator, you will be faster on those problems. Then practice writing essays. All the topics are on the GRE website, so you can write essays on every single topic if you want. Then even if you're a native speaker, you still have to work on your vocabulary, and the best way to do that is to practice with the Magush flashcards app that's available both on iPhones and Android devices. And also make sure that you have at least 2 attempts. So the GRE makes you take 2 weeks in between attempts. So don't plan your GRE for the last minute. I would say it's best to schedule your GRE in the summer before your application, your application cycle. So I was applying in 2018, and I took the GRE in like July or August. I don't remember at this point of the same year, and it took me 2 attempts as well. Usually you don't do your best on your first attempt because this is a new environment. It's very, very stressful. So you are there in the room and you can see how your time is ticking, and you're not allowed to take like anything, even a bottle of water with you to the GRE exam room. I don't know if it's in the US, but in Russia we had this very strict environment. You cannot even take chocolate with you in the GRE room. So yeah, it's very stressful and it takes some getting used to just this environment, the test taking environment. And my second attempt was much better than my first attempt. Yeah, and with that, we move to the personal statement.
Yes, so this is a little bit different for every program. I noticed a lot of the West Coast programs asked for 3 separate essays. So it was a diversity statement, a personal statement, and then a statement of purpose. Versus a lot of the programs that I applied to on the East Coast or in like the Midwest and stuff, they combined that statement of purpose essay with the personal statement essay into this more of like half-half kind of essay, and then just had a diversity statement. But I think this is kind of a good highlight. If you're in one of those, if you're applying to some of those programs that separate them, typically the personal statement is is like a traditional undergraduate kind of autobiographical narrative where you tie in some of those like professional graduate goals, but you would keep all of the research and clinical interest to your statement of purpose, which is more of the technical kind of professional essay. And then this personal statement is more about you and how your own personal narrative, life story has kind of been influenced by those professional clinical goals. In the programs where they combine the two, I think this is a good approach where it's a little bit of both. You do want to mix in those professional and clinical goals and how your undergraduate or other kind of academic experiences have kind of influenced your life and vice versa. But also balance that with a more professional, this is what I want to study, this is what I want to research in graduate school, this is what I see myself doing in graduate school, and this is what I see myself doing post-graduate school. I didn't know about these suggestions that Polina has included in her slides, so I would say use them all. If you have more resources, the more resources you can use them. I found very helpful to have advisors read my essays. So I had my undergraduate advisor, I had my other research programs that I was a part of, they read my essay several times. So do give yourself some space to do revisions. So I would not suggest doing these statements like a month before, but life happens. I've definitely applied my Fulbright application was done 3 weeks before the application and I still got it. So it's doable, but I would not kind of try to do that for graduate school because it is such a lengthy process. But I think these are great suggestions. And yes, the diversity statement, I'm not sure if all schools require that, but it is becoming a more bigger thing as it is, especially if you're in the counseling programs, if you're applying to counseling. I also would advise the clinical people to consider counseling if you are open to it. I didn't even know what counseling psychology was when I applied because we don't have that at UCLA and it's not talked about. But the programs can be very similar, but they can also be very different. So I would definitely research every program you look into, because in some institutions, clinical and counseling students almost do not mingle and they're kept very separate in their programs. because clinical was kind of established as more of that diagnostic kind of pathologizing lens. And counseling psychology programs come from a more lifespan, kind of more critical consciousness approach. So some schools will keep them very separate, and other schools like VCU, which I was surprised to learn, the counseling and the clinical students can do almost the exact same things. But that doesn't apply in many programs. So I would definitely keep that in mind when you're looking at and choosing different programs.
Yeah, I think it's a great advice to ask your advisors and your professors to read your personal statement. If I could do that, I would, but in Russia, we have a very different graduate school application system. We don't do those personal statements, as weird as this may sound. So I had no one to look at my personal statement except for an American friend who is not even in the psychology program. So this book, the Graduate Admission Essays book by Don Asher, was my Bible for the personal statement. And it's an overall good resource to prepare for your graduate school applications process, not just the essays, but he describes the application process overall. So read this book early in your application preparation. So if you're applying this cycle, read it now. If you're applying next cycle, read it now as well, because the earlier you read this book, the better. And also there is a resource, it's called Application Statement Feedback Program. I volunteered for this program as the editor. So this program is geared towards those from the minoritized backgrounds, so people from underrepresented minorities. They prioritize giving feedback to those people. And that's very helpful because you can submit your statement to this program. And I think they open in like September and close in November when the application cycle starts. And you can submit your letter to this program and you will get feedback from 3 or maybe even 4 different people. And the editors in this program are graduate students. Some of them are professors, postdocs, so you'll get a variety of feedback on your essay, and it's great. I wish it existed back when I was applying. Yeah, Camila, do you have anything to add on the personal statement?
Yeah. So for this last application cycle that when I did it, a lot of it did have separate like diversity statements for a lot of the programs that I looked at, but some of them, they were integrated. So I just wanted to say that, to echo that point, to just really make sure that you're doing what they ask. They're very, very strict on word count and things of that nature. So just make sure that you're following exactly what it says. I'll also say that your purpose really has to come through throughout all of these statements. If there is not like a whiff of purpose of, or if there's like some, at least from my experience and from what I've talked to people during the last cycle, if you aren't too sure, if you kind of do like, well, I don't know which way I want to go, but I know I want to go to school, that's not going to cut it as much as someone who is really, and it's okay. Like, it's hard to know, like you can change your mind, but as long as during the statement on paper that you're really showing why you want to go to that specific place, to tailor it to that, that's truly important. I know that a lot of people just say like copy and paste it and then change the school name. Granted, yeah, if you're going to be applying to a lot of places, that's okay, but make sure that you have enough, like a few more sentences that are really changing to really tailor it to that program and to that school. So I say program and school because you're not just going to like the psych program, you're also going to be at the actual, institution in that area. So just adding that into that. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, I agree with that. You have to tailor your personal statement to each school and each program. Your story can remain the same for all the schools, so the first part of the statement will be the same. You can highlight different aspects of your research experience. If you have a lot of research experience, then yeah, you can somewhat tailor it to the school. And of course, you tailor the fit part, why you're the best candidate for the school and how your research interests perfectly fit the research interests of the faculty at the school. And I would also advise to include whether you communicated with them beforehand. For example, my statement contained the sentence, in our recent correspondence with Dr. Brown, he confirmed that our research interests were compatible or something like that. So the sentence that starts, in our recent correspondence with Professor X and Professor Y. So yeah, this will be really valuable because they can see that you already got in contact with their program. So this is valuable information for them. And in my statement, I also indicated that in addition to taking all the mandatory social psychology courses from the program, I was also, I wanted to develop my statistical skills, which turned out to be super important in the social psychology program. Our program, I would say, is like the most research focused among all VCU programs, PhD programs. So I think they liked it as well. So you can look at what they indicate as their strengths in the program webpage, and you can tailor your plans and why you're interested in this program to that, so that they can see that you're a good fit for their program. Yep, and with that we go to the CV.
Yes, which I'm sure most of you have already heard, which I didn't hear until the end of grad school. I mean, of undergrad. But it's good to start putting this all together early as in undergrad, because then remembering everything you've done is so hard, especially if you've stayed longer or had non-traditional routes like taking breaks, coming back. So those timelines could get messy. You can miss things. Or I remember after I submitted, I was like, oh my God, I forgot to put all these other experiences I've had that could have been helpful. I also do not like the exploitative nature of graduate school. So I created my own section that I've now shared with people, and I've seen it also in other people's sections, but I call it service to the profession. And that's basically all unpaid volunteer work that you end up doing that's very related to psychology that you're just not getting paid for, but it's still obviously professional development. You're still contributing to the field or your department, but doesn't neatly fit in these sections, because there's some things that we do that is also very helpful to our professional development, to the program's development, that just doesn't neatly fit in these categories. So I wouldn't be too much of a stickler that everything has to be these sections. I've definitely seen other CVs with other kind of sections that people have kind of created that can also speak to certain experiences that maybe don't fit in these, and also are talk about your journey. But this is kind of the traditional, like it said, you start chronologically. So you start from now going back, and definitely highlight if you're applying to PhDs, the PsyDs. I'll also share a resource on kind of like the differences between PsyDs and PhDs. But if you're applying to PhDs, always emphasize the research. So that goes on the top. So any clinical experiences, if you've had any. As an undergrad, I wasn't exposed to much, but maybe other programs do allow their undergraduates to do more clinical related experiences. If you do have those, great, but they go towards the bottom because PhDs are research heavy. Any funding, grants, scholarships, those are always great to put at the top because it kind of shows that you might have good kind of resources to pool for funding at the graduate level. But definitely highlight those research experiences, posters, publications, conferences. Like I said, I didn't have any formal publications at the undergraduate level. My undergraduate lab was great, but it was very strict on sharing authorship level. So you really have to kind of speak to that as well, which I did in interviews, because some PIs or principal investigators or faculty members at some institutions will let undergrads be a part of everything in all of their process, and others are very strict about if you are going to be on this as authorship, you are doing all of it. And if you are not doing all of it, or at least half of it, you are not on it, which is why I didn't have any publications at the time. But I did have my honors thesis, which I put up there. I did present my honors thesis at different conferences. So I put my posters and my oral presentations. So that's kind of how I try to bolster not having those areas. But if you do, definitely put those up.
Yeah, I agree that you can be creative with what information you include in your CV and the sections that you include there. I had some experience in business and in university administration when I was applying for PhD programs, and I included a separate section for administrative and leadership experience. And now I also include the diversity, equity, and inclusion section in my CV. So it's a separate section that shows what training I have in this area and what service I did in this area as well, because this is now super important for academic career to do service in the DEI area and get some training in it. So I highlighted the special section for that. And yeah, you can get creative with your CV, but the overall rough layout is here. So those are the sections that should probably be there. You may not have any teaching experience, so if there is nothing you can add to the section, you can just keep it. Because as an undergrad, of course, you may not have any teaching experience, and it's okay.
You can keep that also if I was a TA as an undergrad for a freshman class. So as an upper level course, you could apply to TA freshman level courses. So I put that. But if you haven't had any teaching experience, like at the university level, you can always, I also was a part of a formal mentoring program where I would go out to what we call non-traditional high schools in Los Angeles for students who have dropped out or been kicked out of traditional high school settings. And I tutored those students. So I put that under my teaching experience because I did teach them for several days a week. So anything, even though it's not traditional, if it falls in that area, you can kind of make it work sometimes.
Yeah, tutoring and mentoring definitely counts as teaching experience. Yep, anything else on the CV?
Yeah, I was gonna just highlight the question in the chat. So if you don't have any scholarships, awards, or honors, or like recognitions that you can think of, I think that's okay. Like there's other people who have been like that too, but it's about how else you can kind of expand the other areas of your CV. So if I don't know when this person is specifically applying, but like that's when a gap year can really come in handy to trying to look at what's out there, like doing a post back. And these are things that will kind of, I don't know if we're going to get to them, but we're going to try to get to them. That can kind of go a little bit more in depth than that. Just wanted to add.
Yeah, I didn't have any honors or awards on my CV. I didn't even have a section for that. And I still got into this PhD program. So it's definitely possible to get in without any honors and awards. Yeah, then let's go to references and how to ask them.
Yes, I definitely say have more, because I had one professor who did not write my letter, who said he would and never got it in on time. So if I would have relied on them, I would not have had my application complete. So if your program requires 2, ask 3. If your program requires 3, ask 4. Always to have that backup in case something happens. These are good points, kind of asking at least 2 months in advance. Emphasizing the strong letter. If they cannot write you a strong letter, do not get a letter from that person. If it's just going to be a lukewarm letter, and just a copy templated letter that they use for 50 other students, probably not the best. So you definitely want to ask them from people who know you. I've always been told academic advisors are a must. So if you had a person who walked you through an undergraduate thesis or publications, ask them. I asked my McNair advisor, who was an additional research advisor, but not my main advisor. And then I asked a professor who I TA'd for those are my 3 letters. And then I had an extra other faculty that I helped run a community project with that we didn't do any research with, but I knew them on a professional level. So definitely stick to academic people if you can. If you can't, maybe a clinical focused, somebody who has some type of psychology related experience, but definitely would not stray to like work supervisors or things like that. Try to stick to academic as possible. That was at least my recommendations on what I did, and I think it worked out well.
Yeah, I will share my experience, how I got my references. One of my references was from my advisor in Russia. So my story is that I did a PhD in Russia, and then now I'm doing a PhD in psychology here. My Russian PhD was also in psychology. So I asked my advisor from there, but I didn't have any other academic psychology references, and I didn't have any references outside of Russia. And I thought that like more well-known in the West, professors who are more well-known in the East and in the US in particular could be more helpful to get into the psychology PhD programs outside of Russia. So the way I found my two recommendations was that I went to a conference, and at that conference, I just approached to professors. Well, one of them is a professor, and the second one works at a nonprofit, but they do research. So they are both doing research. And I just asked them, I told them about myself and how I was interested in their talks. And then I just asked them if they were interested in taking me as an unpaid RA for the summer. And then if they are satisfied with my work, then they could write me letters of recommendation. So basically, I worked for them for free over the summer, and they wrote my recommendations. So this is one of the ways to get those. Then what else about the recommendations? Yeah, it's a great advice to have multiple backups. Because some of your recommendation givers might fall through because they just decided not to do it, or maybe something happens in their life. I know a close person gets sick and they cannot perform those obligations anymore. So, life happens. So I had 5 people who could provide me with letters of recommendation in total. My 3 top ones were those 2 who I found at a conference, plus my Russian advisor, plus 2 more backups who could write the letters instead of those 3. And it was helpful because one of my references, for some reason, he just wasn't getting the invitation to write a reference from 2 of the programs where I was applying. And like I did all I could. I sent multiple requests from their application systems, but he just wasn't getting those requests for some reason. So I had to ask my backup for that. So it's always helpful to have backups in case of system glitches as well. So unfortunately, application systems are not perfect. Sometimes they produce some glitches, and you have to be prepared for that.
There's some questions about taking a gap year and references, so I just wanted to speak on it. So before you take the gap year, if you have a few set of people that you think, okay, this is someone that I would want to do this reference for me, but you're going to take a gap year, just keep that connection going. So like keep in touch with them, let them know ahead of time, like, hey, I'm going to take a gap period, but I know that I'm going to want to eventually apply to a graduate program or what have you. And then that way that you can just keep that connection going so they can still write it for you. You'd be surprised by I wasn't surprised, but like you'd be surprised how surprised some people are, how helpful professors can be. They're human beings, like they're people. They've also been in your shoes, maybe not the same, but like they've been there before when it comes to applying to places. So I would say just making sure that you're fostering that connection. It doesn't have to be like buddy, like super close, but just keep it going where they know that this is like your goal eventually, and they're probably going to want to help. If you're not going to be, if you're going for a gap year and you're not planning on, doing something like research related or like in the field, obviously it's going to be a little bit more difficult to kind of create those spaces within where you're at. So just seeking out people that can help you is really important. So if you're not too close to people now that are your faculty, that are in your faculty, I saw a question in the chat about that. It's not too late to try to just get a connection. So you don't have to be super, super close, but it's just talking to them and letting them know that you want to apply eventually, and maybe just asking their advice. Just start with that. Just start with trying to get a connection, and then they'll most likely write you a recommendation, because that's usually how it goes too. There are people who haven't been working with a faculty member for like a year. They start talking to them for a couple months, and then it's like maybe they can write a recommendation. But supplying them with all the proper information that's like on here, like your CV, writing sample, stuff like that, is going to be the way to go, because they need to understand you more as like a student and what your goals are to actually write a strong recommendation, because they can write a recommendation that isn't well, like prepared well, and that's not going to help you. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that.
What also helps, when I took my 2-year gap to do the ETA, or the Fulbright English teaching assistantship, my mentor at the time was like, I'm going to forget what we did in 2 years. So some faculty might actually be aware of that. And I can't remember at the time, but she used a letter of recommendation banking system. So there is an online system where you can bank your letters and use them at another time. So I don't remember the name. I'll have to kind of go scour around 10 bazillion years ago, my emails. But when I graduated, she wrote my letter at the time, kind of kept it a little broad so that it would fit multiple programs when I did apply 2 years later. And then she banked it into the system anonymously. So I still couldn't read the letter, but it was there. I think it was like $15 a year. So I just kept the subscription. And then in 2 years when I applied, I pulled that letter, and through that system, you can send it to all the schools. So in a way, if you can find systems like that, they've probably made more. I would actually suggest doing that, because your letter might actually be better right after undergrad. If you are planning on going away for 2 years or multiple years, or you're not sure you're going to apply, the letter they write you right after you've worked with them might be a little better than if you come back to them years later, especially if you haven't been able to keep that connection. What is another great thing that I do now all the time is I write my own letters of rec. Most professors don't have time to write your letters of rec. And if they do, they'll say, well, I don't really know what to highlight. So I always suggest to write the letter. And most of the time I'm a better writer at those letters than they are. So I write the letter, give it to them, and then they edit it. So I write the letter highlighting areas that I'm good at, and then they definitely edit it, change it. I don't see the final version. So it's still anonymous. And that's actually the more preferred practice in graduate school. If you ask the advisors for a letter in graduate school, a lot of them will do that approach. It's a little not so common in undergrad, but some of my faculty were like that, and they were open to that and more willing to say yes and whatnot, because you know yourself the best. So that's also another option. Others probably will say, no, I'll take it. And that's fine as well.
Yeah, that was my experience as well. One of my references asked me to write his letter of recommendation like a few hours before the deadline. So yeah, that was pretty nerve-wracking. So it's good to have those drafts on hand so that you have something to send them. Not everybody will ask you to write your own letters of recommendation. As Melissa said, this is not very common at the undergrad level when you're applying for a PhD, but be prepared that some of them might ask you for a draft, and it's okay. And one more thing, just as a token of your gratitude, you can send them a report of your results when you have all your application results. So where you interviewed, where you received offers, which one you accepted, and of course, a thank you note for their efforts as your references, so that they can see the results of their contribution as well, and they will be just happy for you. Okay, that's about the references. And the interview, we won't give you like a lot of information on the interview now, because this is a whole it should be its own webinar, but we will just quickly go over what to expect during the interview.
Definitely just suggest there's a lot of undergrad, like my faculty at the undergraduate level has like a little question sheet, like a little sample sheet that they would ask interviewees. Wasn't the exact questions, but it was like a good starting off point. So just questions to prepare for. I also found that was helpful to ask older students. So older students might have resources. If they did it last cycle, they might remember some questions they got asked. There's some pretty standard questions out there. You can Google it. I was also Googling like questions for undergraduate psych interviews and actually found a lot of good example sheets that way. And I prepped my responses to it. I just found the most helpful thing to do mock interviews. So have your faculty advisor at the undergrad level just do an interview with you like they would any other applicant. And I found that to be helpful, and then them giving me feedback. Also asking older graduate students in the lab. I do that with the undergrads who are applying currently. So then we can give them feedback and things like that. And when you do apply on the like interview route, you will have interviews with graduate students while you apply. So it's a good kind of prep. And those graduate students do go and tell the faculty whether they like you or not. So it is a good practice to do it with graduate students as well. So if you have access to grad students in your current institution in the psych department, I just found mock interviews to be the best.
Real quick, I just want to add, if you make any notion that you do not, like it's not your first pick, it's not going to happen. Just being completely honest. Also, if you're over, like, literally what Melissa is saying is the truth. Like the grad students, they talk about it. The faculty will ask for their advice. At the end, it is up to their discretion. Like they're going to make their decision. But if you make any inkling that it's not your first choice, it probably won't happen. Okay.
Yeah, also they are looking for candidates who know what they want to do in the future. So even if you don't know what your career plans for the next 10 years or for your life are, and many of us don't, like the world is changing every day. So how can we know what we're going to do in 5 years? They will still ask you those questions and they expect you to know. So even if you don't, pretend that you do. So you have to convince them that you know what you're doing and why you're going to graduate school and what your plans for the future are. So for the research intense institutions and programs, they usually look for the candidates who would like to go to academia after PhD, although this is changing because academic job market is very competitive. So not everybody can get to academia after PhD. So this is changing a little bit, but a lot of them still lean towards the answer is like, I want to be a professor in the future. So those programs who have the practical component like clinical and counseling psychology, they are also looking for candidates who would like to become psychology practitioners like clinicians, counselors, school psychologists, and so on. But they also accept candidates who would like to go for research in the future. More programs are accepting candidates who would like to work in the industry after PhD, but I would be cautious about that. It's better to give them an impression that you want to go into academia or practical work. So for the research-focused programs, go for academia. For the like more research slash practical, it's either academia, research, or practical work. So yeah, bottom line, even if you don't know what you want to do with your life, you have to give an impression like you do. And yeah, just quickly, what you might do after you apply and after you take your interviews, write a thank you note. It takes very little time to write to the person who communicated with you. Usually it's a graduate student who organizes the interview day for the program. So you can write them a thank you note. You can write a thank you note to the professors whom you spoke with. And the majority of the candidates don't write those notes. So you will be like one of the few who do, and this will attract more attention to your application. You can ask about what kind of funding you can expect if you get admitted, but usually it's in the offer. And there are mixed opinions about whether you should negotiate your and try to get higher funding or not. Some schools are more flexible, especially private schools. Some schools, especially public schools, are less flexible. For example, VCU has a set salary for graduate students, and it cannot go up, not salary, stipend. But yeah, it's more like if you're comfortable with negotiating, then you can try to negotiate. If not, I wouldn't go this route.
Definitely ask, though, what is everything you're getting, because VCU does not pay student fees, and that costs about $1,500 per semester. So that comes out of your stipend. So even though the stipend is $22,000, not really, because you have to pay those fees. So those $3,000 get knocked down. So now you only have $19,000. So always ask about funding and what's covered, what's not covered. Student health insurance was not an option when I came here. We created a committee and wrote to the dean for 4 years straight before they created a graduate student health plan. But health plans were also not covered for graduate students. And now the health plan we do have is only half covered. The department covers half and you cover the other half, which was a big change because on the West Coast, all the department covers all of your fees and your insurance. So for me, that's something I wish I would have asked coming from there to here, and I didn't. So always ask what is going to be the package, what else are you expected to cover, all of that.
Yeah, this is all usually indicated in the offer that they sent you, the formal document that you're supposed to accept and sign. Yeah, all this financial information is usually there. So be very attentive as you read it, because sometimes, yeah, as Melissa said, your actual scholarship will be much lower than the scholarship that's there. And different universities have different amounts of student fees. Sometimes they are covered, sometimes you have to pay them out of pocket. Sometimes there can be some additional hidden expenses that you didn't know about, like health expenses and so on. So yeah, make sure to read your offer very attentively and make an informed decision about if this offer is livable or not for you.
I
Yep.
also want to add to just talk to the graduate students. Talk to them, ask them a loan, get their emails. They'll most likely give it because that's usually how it goes. But really talk to them about these factors because they're going to be honest.
Yeah, so with that, there are some additional resources those are the last part of this presentation is about the acceptance rates in doctoral programs and then in master's programs. As you can see, those rates are pretty low. So social psychology is notoriously low in terms of its acceptance rates. And other programs are more variable. Some accept more candidates, some accept less candidates, but you can see that the changes, it's very competitive. It's very, and it's competitive at the master's level as well. Although some programs accept about 70% of the offers, and for some of them, the range is super high, like for neuroscience. Some programs accept like 20% of the candidates. Some of them accept over 90, so you never know. But PhD programs are generally super competitive. So it's very stressful. Your application year will be one of the most stressful years of your life, probably. So it's very important to engage in self-care during the application process. And first of all, rejection is okay. I applied for 14 programs. I was rejected by 12 of them. So and I got an offer for VCU that was fully funded. I got an offer for the Claremont Graduate University that was not fully funded, so I couldn't accept that offer. I got 2 interviews, one at VCU, one at Rutgers, and then Rutgers rejected me. So graduate school, from application throughout your whole academic career, you will get a lot of rejection. So it's important to normalize it. Everybody gets rejected a lot during the application process. And one thing that helped me while I was waiting for the results of my applications, I had to take my mind off applications because I was just going crazy about those rejections. So I watched Game of Thrones for the whole period while I was waiting for the results of my applications. And this, I was able to take my mind off rejections like that. But yeah, this is super stressful. Then the competition is high. And it's very important to have social support, so you can ask your friends to give you extra support, love, and attention during this period, especially closer to the application deadlines. So it's now November for many of the clinical programs, and December for the rest of the programs. So yeah, make sure that you have support, especially during this period. Then Camila will talk about the post-bac experience and taking the gap year in a moment. Then pace yourself, make a plan, make a schedule, and stick to it and keep organized. I made lots of spreadsheets to track all of my communications, all of the programs where I was applying. If I fulfill all the application lists, like what documents I had to send to the program. So I was tracking all of it, because if you're not tracking, it's very easy to get lost in all the applications. So yeah, take care of yourself and stay organized. And rejection is okay. We are all getting a lot of rejection.
Yeah, never take it personal either. Sometimes faculty actually, like, they'll lose funding and they can no longer take students. Like, you never know what's actually happening behind the scenes is what I'm trying to get at. Polina, do you want me to share the screen now to do the PowerPoint, or do you have it?
Yeah, you can share your screen so that you
Okay.
can click through the slides. I will stop sharing this one.
I do want to be mindful of time, so I'm gonna try my best to kind of talk about these things, but also if you have questions, just please ask them. All right, let me get it open. All right. Okay. So it all depends on your situation, if you actually need to take a gap year or not. Most people actually do have to have a gap year or two. It all depends on your situation. If you are already heavily involved with research, and by involved, it's not just, doing a few things for the lab, which they do matter, that is important, but they're really looking at how involved you are. And this can be with, like, if you're doing conferences, if you're doing just helping with posters, if you're doing publications, things like that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you need those things, but they are very much helpful. There's also the possibility to do a master's degree, which obviously comes with a lot of different considerations, just because it does cost money to do a master's degree. It's not like going to the PhD route where it is funded. Yeah, so if you're trying to figure out, like, which way to go, it's really just about looking at yourself and what you actually want to do in which program you want to go in. So grad school is expensive. If you feel like you need to take a gap to just work, the type of job that you're doing is something that you should really think about, just because if it's something that's outside of the field, completely not related to psychology whatsoever, it's going to be harder to kind of show the depth of what your abilities are on your CV. So let me keep going. So there's so many different ways to figure out what you want to do. If you want to get a research assistantship, there are some that are volunteer, and then there are some that are paid. So it can be really competitive at times if you want a paid research position. If you want to do like a project manager position, that's completely different, but you usually do need experience with helping run a lab and actually knowing what a project entails. Like if you are in school right now and you're helping run one of the studies in your lab, that looks really good. That can be really useful when it comes to trying to become a project manager, but they're usually looking at more in depth of what, if you can actually help manage it, and like if you've trained students, things like that. If you are looking for which route to go in, conferences are really important, or webinars where you can actually network with other people and like talk to them, or telling people that your faculty that you're interested in what they're working on, things like that. It's just all about trying to make those connections to see if they have positions in their labs, or even if it's volunteer work. Obviously, it depends on like what your situation is. There's also fellowships and postbacks, specifically like VCU offers a postbac and more in biomedical research. But if you apply to it, you can get like a year of just like more intensive work of like working with a mentor, coming up with a research project, things like that. And, you know, there are countless programs across the country that do offer these postbacks. That you can look at. That way you can get funded, you get like a stipend for like a year, and you can continue that research. So yeah, some of the things on here are just like really just about connecting to other students or faculty to see if there are positions available, if you can work in that way. If you know that you want to go more down like a clinical route, or you want to like work with people instead of just focusing on research, there's like other things in across the country. Like you could become a behavioral tech during your gap year, and that way you can like work in those settings to just get more experience with how it works in a mental health setting. So like there's different ways to look about this, but it's all about, you know, reaching out and connecting to try to find those different paths that you can have. Research assistantships, I'd say, from my experience, is what really helped me. I started my freshman year, like I said, and I didn't stop. I was part of multiple labs, but I'd say that that's not usually the best fit for everyone. It's really important that you're really dedicating your time in your research assistantship. So if you just want to focus on one, it kind of comes down to like what you're producing and what work you're doing, what skills you're learning. So really getting involved in stats. Most likely you're going to need stats for grad school. It's really important. And those sort of experiences are what can really benefit you during your gap period of time. I was just talking about this. So yeah, there's paid positions and volunteer positions. Yeah.
Camila, could you go to the previous slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight this last sentence. Even if there are no open positions, some professors will create positions for you. Sometimes they just didn't think about that, and they just didn't know that they could take a research assistant for their current project. This was my experience. So I already told you about how I found my 2 references at a conference, and one of them works at a nonprofit, and that nonprofit does research on character strengths and mindfulness and things like that. So before I approached them and offered them to work as an unpaid research assistant for them for a while in exchange for a recommendation, they told me that they never thought about that they could take a research assistant, and then they took me, and it worked out very well. So yeah, as Camila said, this is all a matter of reaching out and just putting yourself out there. And when you reach out, make sure to offer them your specific skills, and everybody is looking for statistical skills and like programming skills, so or like data management, data analysis skills. So if you have those, then that's great. You will be very competitive on the RA job market. But even if you don't, you can always do literature reviews for them. You can work with participants on their studies. I currently run 2 studies at VCU, so and I get applications from students both at VCU and outside of VCU to join this research. And sometimes my advisor just forwards me those applications. And it worked great with some of those people. So they joined our study team, and they are just great contributors to our research, and I will be happy to write them recommendations once they need them. So yeah, be active and ask around. That's the way to find those opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. Melissa, do you have anything to add?
No, I also always just suggest out of the box thinking, only because that was me, because I applied to 12 programs, attained 8 interviews, and had 2 straight offers and 3 alternate offers. And it's like unheard of for someone with such low GPA that I had, no formal publications, and I was not a research manager. I was a research assistant for 3 years, but I was not a research manager. So I think if you find yourself in that non-traditional kind of applicant setting, you just really have to sell yourself, and you got to hustle in all other areas. So finding other research assistantships, and even if whatever it is that you're not in, highlight what's psychology about it. Like, I wanted to travel for those 2 years, and I was teaching English. English has almost nothing to do with psychology, at least just teaching it. It's like ESL and things but what I did after I taught ESL, it was the Fulbright only required 20 hours a week. So for the other 20 hours a week, I helped run therapy groups at a local substance abuse recovery center in my small town in Costa Rica with a social worker. So even though I was teaching English, I was still making time to do something psychology related. So when I went on interviews, when I went on my essays, that's what I talked about. So kind of amplifying all the other things in your application that are psych related, even if they're not traditional psych. If you can get these like research experiences and traditional experiences, great. But as a student of color with a lot of other chronic illness, disabilities, things like that, some of these are inaccessible to me sometimes. So you have to create your own paths, and it's doable. But you have to kind of find that kind of hustling way approach to it.
Yeah, you're highlighting something that's really important. And I think that's why connecting with people is the best bet. That's what I had to do, like just talking to people, asking around, and really putting myself out there to be like, I have no idea how to do any of this. I'm brand new to this, but I really want to learn. And if you are very eager to gain the skills and experience, you still have people will take a chance at times. At least that's what happened to me. And now I'm very happy in my counseling psych program. So let's keep going. We were just talking about this, but there's different routes that you can take. Just look everywhere. Like if you're looking on listservs, if you become part of listservs, or even checking just different programs across the country, most of the time there are people who are asking for like paid research help. It might not be in your state, which is not always accessible, but if you're willing to figure it out, there are these options out there. Volunteering obviously can sometimes be easier if you're outside of school. If you want to stick around to a lab that you're already a part of, like ask them to see if you can stay around. Like it all depends, obviously, but it's hard to just do unpaid labor. So obviously that's a lot to ask for a person, but paid positions are out there is what I'm trying to get out. That's kind of what I did during I didn't have a full gap year just because I was non-traditional. So I'll consider that my gap of 8 years before I decided to go back. But once I did graduate, I did have a bit of time where I was figuring things out, and I did have a paid position through finding and asking people like, hey, I really don't want to leave and stop doing research, but this isn't feasible for me. And they helped me find one. And so really talking and just being honest sometimes to people who are mentors, or maybe someone who's not really fully a mentor yet, but they know enough people around your institution, or like even other institutions, it's good to ask and just kind of see what's out there. So when it comes to preparing your CV/resume, the CV is obviously more in depth if you're not too aware of it, with your research experiences, your training experiences, and your skills that are more directed to, being an academic or like a student, is how I kind of understand it. You want to try to cater it to really expand on those things. If you have other jobs that you've done, that's more safe for like your actual resume, that are, if it's like jobs that are like more retail or like customer service, but it doesn't mean that those skills can't be applied to some of like, you know, your skills of like working together. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be working with your colleagues, and it is something that people do consider if you are, you know, able to understand how to work with the team at times. I know that's something that did come up that I've heard about for other people. So it's good to just see how you can kind of apply other aspects of your life into your skills here. So I know that the CV was, we went more in depth in the other presentation, but yeah, so if it is irrelevant, if it's something that's super old or just doesn't make sense anymore to like the direction you're going in, save the space on your CV, because CVs can get quite long, but most of the time people want them to be a little bit shorter just because they're already going through a lot of application materials, and it's like enough is enough. But if you need help with trying to figure out what your CV needs, you know, really reach out to like other students, graduate students, and even like faculty to just see like how you can kind of cater it better when you're in a gap year, depending on where you're at. That's why it's so important to try to keep connections with like people that you met while you were in school, which can be difficult, but I think just trying to go past that and like reaching out at any point that you have, you'd be surprised how often people do want to help. I don't know if y'all have anything else to add for this. Okay. So the whole point for having your gap year, all depends on what you want to do. Some school's hard. Sometimes you just want to break, and it can be easy to want to just completely disengage, which I totally get. But it's still important, if this is a goal, like your end goal is to go to graduate school, that you are setting yourself up in the best light that you can. So here you want to try to work towards things that can kind of boost your CV. So if you are in a lab and you're able to work on some posters, even if you're not a first author, you can try to help with those experiences to gain that for your CV. Obviously, first authorship will obviously look a little bit better, because then it shows that you were more involved with like the research that went into the poster. And it's all about being really upfront with who's involved. So sometimes it's the PI, sometimes it's a graduate student. So being willing to kind of have those conversations, which can seem scary, is super essential. So it's like just opening up and being like, I really want to go to graduate school eventually. I know I need publications, and publications can be a manuscript, but sometimes people consider them posters as well. So it's like there's different routes to go on, but really being upfront about it early on is what's important. If you've been working on a study for like a year and you have seen some conferences that are coming up and you want to see what you can work on, just talk to them, and they can tell you like, hey, this data, like we don't want to release any of this yet, but I do have this other data set that's kind of hanging around. Maybe we can work with this. So like there's different ways to do this, but it's just about trying to see how you can get more involved to understand those processes. So like sometimes it's just like doing that lit review. Sometimes it's actually doing like the writing. Sometimes it's just forming and presenting the poster, which these are all experiences that'll just help you in grad school, because most programs require you to keep doing this sort of work. If you need clinical experience or neuroimaging experience, like finding the different places in your state or like outside of your state that actually have like facilities that have volunteering or paid positions where you can just be like a tech or like someone who shadows, or like becoming more involved in those aspects can be really beneficial. I got to shadow a social worker, and I'm in a counseling psych, and I only applied to one counseling psych program, and the other programs were 3 other like clinical programs, because I thought I wanted to do clinical. I realized I did not want to do clinical. So that's a whole other conversation. If you're in between the two, my inbox is open. I'll share my email, because I realized I did not want to do clinical at the end of the day. But anyways, finding those places where you can just get like experience however much it is super helpful. And it does look good on your CV if you're able to stay at a place for at least a year. But if it's something that you're just having a short experience for 6 months, if it's like a summer thing, there is nothing wrong with that. Just always give it a shot and apply. So I also wanted to say that. Yeah, I don't know if you all have anything else to add.
Yes, summer research experience. That's something you touched upon. There's a lot of formal programs, especially at the undergraduate level at different like universities that you can apply to for like a 10-week summer program. And at the end of it, you either do a pub or you do like a poster. So if you're still an undergrad, definitely take advantage of those in the summers, and at least you get to go to another state. I did one of those. There's very few that are available for postbacks after grad, but they do exist. I did one that was in Mexico that was after graduation. They had undergrads and postbacks, and I applied for right after when I graduated. I got rejected from it twice as an undergrad. I didn't have a lot of experience at that time, but at the end I did, and I loved it. I got to do research project with psychologists in Mexico, and that helps on your CV, and it's something you do in the summers. So if you're tied up with work or other things during the year, but can find that little pocket of time, that's also another good opportunity.
I wanted to highlight the importance of conferences. So the point number 4 on the previous slide says that go to as many conferences and workshops as possible. And if you're doing a poster at the conference, and even if you're not the first author, but you're going to present this poster, then your school might pay for this conference. So I know VCU has those scholarships that students can apply for if they are presenting at the conference. If you're not presenting, your university most likely won't pay for it. But if you are presenting, then they will pay for it. So you get to go to the conference, your university pays for it, or it pays some share of your expenses. And then you get to meet your potential advisors at the conference, your potential future research assistant opportunities or lab manager opportunities. And you get to talk to those professors who you meet at the conference and get some inside information about their programs. So yeah, conferences are super important. I think going to conferences made it possible for me to make it to PhD programs. Yeah, and as Camila said, many conferences provide scholarships for both undergraduate and graduate students. So make sure to apply for those scholarships. So yeah, conferences are super important.
Yeah. And even if it's a conference at your university, like VCU, we hold some of those, and they are very helpful to get and understand that experience. So see wherever you're at. If you're at VCU, I know I think it's at every end of the spring semester, there's like a big one for undergraduate and graduate students. We also have our own like publication, our own pub. I don't know what to call it, but we have our own like journal, I guess. See if your university also has one, and see if you have like an honors thesis, or if you don't, just talk to who you can to see if there's a way that you can get involved with that. So yeah, there's a lot of different skills and software that are very, very useful for your for graduate school. So if you decide that you aren't really too sure what you want to do, but you're involved in more tech stuff, that could be a way if you're deciding to work in that area, trying to understand like what can like coding, if that is very useful for a lot of depending on what you want to do, but it's very useful in a lot of programs and universities where they need people who know how to code and how to use specific softwares. Python is very popular, but the ones listed here, as you can see, are ones that are typically used across universities. I feel like Polina can talk a lot more about this. She's a stats queen, so if she has more to say on this, I'd appreciate it. Academically, being able to write grant writing, that's a much harder area to gain like before coming to grad school. That's usually when most people will learn it. But if you're able to get mentorship to write it. You know, there are like the NSF, for instance, there are organizations that offer grants that can actually help you fund your own way to school throughout your PhD program. So if you're interested in working with someone who does not have funding, so they're not able to take students, but you get your own funding, it can help you get some leeway to getting into a program. So I was given that advice before, because that's the way they did it. It can be really hard though if you don't have those skills for grant writing, because it's a very intensive application. So organizational skills and time management, very, very essential. So whatever you're doing in your time, if you're able to kind of showcase that you have those skills, like on your CV, or when you're speaking to someone, when you eventually decide to go back, like these are areas that are super important. Being productive. It's very easy to start projects and then not finish them. Sometimes things happen and it can really showcase how you're able to handle failure, because part of research is being able to deal with failure, because at times things just don't work out or you lose funding, things like that. So this is something to keep in mind. Understanding how to conceptualize research and kind of go through the ideas of like what can even be a study, or like how you can look at a problem. I know that I'm really big into ideas, so that was somewhere that I was pretty useful in the labs that I worked in, where it's like, let's just talk about it and see where we can get at. Being able to have those sort of discussions are very, very useful. Yeah, and just something that's really important is networking. So making those connections with people, with students, because these might be colleagues for like the rest of your career if this is the route you want to go in. It can be multidisciplinary. It doesn't just have to be in psych, like just, you never know who knows each other. And I've come to find out that it's a pretty small circle in the scientific community, depending on where you're looking. So it's really important to just make those connections. Also being able to answer questions eloquently. I want to speak on that. It can be really difficult. I know for me, I have to code switch the way I talk, just because from where I'm from, I didn't really like hold professionalism or however you want to speak at it. I don't know how to call it. It was really difficult, but I had to kind of learn those skills. I had a mentor who helped me with it to kind of learn how to so how do I actually present? Because when you're holding an actual presentation, like at a conference, it's completely different than like this setting where it's a little bit more low key, right? So just thinking about these different ways that kind of all connect to help you is really important, is what I'm trying to get at. Yeah, I don't know if you all have anything else to say, or Polina, if you want to talk about stats.
I can always talk about stats. I just want to say that if you're applying for research intensive programs, or the programs that just do research and don't do any practical work like clinical and counseling. So for social psychology, it's definitely super important to have advanced statistical skills, even at the time of application. For our program, we give preference to the candidates who have advanced statistical skills when they are entering the program. And this translates to taking perhaps at least the undergrad statistics that are available at your university. Perhaps you can take some graduate statistical courses if you feel like you will be able to pass them with a good grade, because we look at the grades for the statistics courses. And if you can teach yourself R and other programming languages, but mostly R because it's used in science most of all. So you will be more competitive if you learn it. There are lots of free materials to learn R on the internet. So yeah, it's very easy to find it. And it has a pretty steep learning curve. So I would say for a couple of years, you will be constantly frustrated because you put a comma somewhere in the wrong place in your code, and then it doesn't work. But then it's like learning a foreign language. At the beginning, you feel like really cranky. You make some mistakes in the language, but then you just get used to this. And it's the same with programming languages. So yeah, for those who are interested in research careers or data science careers, which are also available after psychology, especially social psychology PhD, like some of our graduates went to work for Facebook and Google. So yeah, learning those skills is super important for those.
Yeah, I think we're done with this. Obviously, I feel like there's probably more there, but I left my email in the chat. And if you all have any questions, if you want to stay right now, we can hopefully answer them. But other than that, yeah, that's pretty much it. If you really don't know if this is the route for you, it's okay to take some time and figure that out. It's hard, right? Like, it's your life is what I'm trying to get at. Like, but it's important to be mindful if this is something you eventually might want to come back to, which it can be hard, but there's always a way. Hustle. I like how Melissa kept bringing that up. Like, there's always a way. But all right, we're done.
Yeah, thank you for being with us. And yeah, both Camila and Melissa shared their emails in the chat. And you can find my email, just find the email about this event that that you got. And you can hit reply to this, and then the reply will go to my email. So feel free to ask for additional resources. We are happy to share everything we can. And we will have one more event in the series. It's about finance and how to fund your application. So Melissa will be speaking in this event as well, and me too. And there will also be so finance, how to fund your applications and how to fund yourself throughout grad school, and what funding mechanisms are there, what's available. And one more event that we will have specifically for international students will be on May 8th. At 7 a.m. EST, because we want to cover the time zones for different countries. So if you are an international student, be on the lookout for the announcement about this event, because this will be specifically for those who are applying for US psychology PhD programs from outside of the US, which is even more difficult than applying for inside of the US. So thanks a lot for sticking with us. And yeah, be on the lookout for the announcements of our further events. Okay, I will stop recording.